Welcome to Connecticut Politics TV. I am Joe Aguirre. Thank you so much for joining us. Last week on the show, we talked to House Majority Leader Jason Rojas, and I brought up one of these groups in Connecticut that they'd engaged in a little bit of a Twitter back and forth, and he seemed very dismissive of the group. And I recently spoken to Alexis Harrison and Maria Weingarten on the radio about their group. And I thought you ladies did such a fantastic job on the radio. I thought maybe there'd be some headway with these guys, but they watch this stuff. So let's tell them a little bit about how CT 169 Strong got together, how you two joined forces. And just so people understand, Maria is a realtor here in the state of Connecticut, so she understands housing. I'm also a realtor, not as prolific as she, but we do have some understanding of the market. Alexis has been very heavily involved in politics and does PR and is a friend. So glad to have you aboard. Let's get into it, Alexis. How did you come across Maria, and who decided to get this group started?
Yeah, absolutely. I became involved in land use many years ago. I'm from Fairfield, and I had started a group called Fairfielders Protecting Land and Neighborhoods. And, we would help neighborhoods fight against big projects being seen by, the Wetlands Commission, the Zoning Board. And I really made the connection between, these land use bodies and saving our environment and climate change, and just how important it is to have really astute voices on these boards when it comes to, climate change. So that's what piqued my interest. And then I actually eventually would run for the Zoning Board in Fairfield. But and then I think during COVID, I started reading about some of these bills coming from Hartford, and I'm like, whoa, these are pretty bad. And I became acquainted with Maria because I was trying to form my own group. She had already, started 169 Strong, and I'm like, well, there's no point of having two groups. Let's just, join forces. So that was in late 2020.
So Maria, what had fired you up to get the group started in the first place?
Well, I think it's sort of as Alexis said, is that, just looking at what some of these bills were, and I had a little bit of exposure to Hartford prior to this, looking at regionalization and when they had those bills a number of years ago. And I felt sort of the same onerous sort of top-down overtaking of local rights. And I just really felt motivated to get engaged on this. And there were a number of other like-minded individuals, and we started putting together a website. We put together a website and a Facebook page and social media. We would team up with others from the legislature who were also against the proposal. And we would, whether they were Democrat or Republican, and we would just go to different towns across the state. And we would just put the message out there just to raise awareness. And that's sort of what got us going. And then Alexis and I were introduced to each other. We said, oh, this is great. It's great to have some more like-minded folks to work with and have our in the foxhole with trying to fight back some of these bad bills.
Alexis, you mentioned climate change, which isn't necessarily an issue I would have associated your political views with. Not to paint you into any corner, but that's great because I'm a big proponent of climate change. It's important. The science is showing us that.
Absolutely.
Do you get any pushback for that position, or?
No, I think,
Alexis, are you both frozen?
I thought I stumped her with my question.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'll start over.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think you can always have discussion with reasonable people. Climate change is in fact real. There's no disputing that. And what I've learned over the years is our local zoning boards really serve as mini EPAs. We're the first lines of defense when it comes to, climate, to addressing, environmental needs, looking out for land, because that's what zoning does. Land, we oversee the use of land.
It's pretty clear, I think, Democrat, Republican in this state, that we obviously have serious housing issues. Another of the suggestions from Representative Rojas was the idea that 8-30G is like this buzzword, in that he's like, I don't think it means what they think it means. But there obviously are a lot of issues in this state. And I've talked to him about the idea that, when we talk about local affordable housing, nobody's doing it. So how do we incentivize? How do we get Connecticut where it needs to be? We're in a bad way, obviously, with the housing market that we currently have. There's nothing to rent. Rents are beyond affordable in most places. We have the lowest vacancy rate in the country. So what's the best idea? Governor Lamont's idea is to throw a ton of money at it and try to get stuff built. I don't think you guys are down for that.
No, and I think we should discuss 830G because it's certainly a big topic here in Fairfield County. And I'll let Maria address, the housing issue because she is a realtor and is on the ground there. But 830G is a failed law. It was it came to bear in 1990, and it said every town in Connecticut, rather, whether you're Waterbury or Bridgeport, Fairfield, Westport, 10% of your housing stock has to be deemed affordable. And in order to help build that, these units, developers who create affordable housing, they're essentially exempt from zoning laws that you and I would have to adhere to, like setbacks, height, things like that. As long as they, deed restrict these units for 40 years. So after 40 years, it sunsets, and we no longer have a portion of those apartments deemed affordable. So we have the density, but not the affordability. So that law has not really addressed the housing needs that we do have because it's not permanent. It's certainly not a solution that I think it has been successful. And I wish our legislator would look at this law because I think it just hasn't done what it set out to do. And laws get changed all the time, but it seems to be a hot button thing in Hartford.
I would add that, part of the problem with 830G is even the way it's a way of keeping score. But I would say it's a rigged way of keeping score because we actually took a look at it because one of the things we realized when we were testifying and others were testifying is that some of the legislators would say, well, do you know exactly what percent your town has in affordable? And they would say 3% or 4% or whatever their numbers were. And we said, well, okay, let's take a deep dive and understand where those numbers really come from. And there's 4 categories. And depending on where you live, some of those categories are not even available to you, especially in Lower Fairfield County, which has a very different market that's dependent on Metro New York as opposed to the rest of the economy of the state of Connecticut. So when you look at it, you realize that the only column that many of those Lower Fairfield County towns can avail themselves of is column 1, which is you develop your own affordable housing. So that would mean paying for it. So so when you look at the ones that have 10%, there used to be 31. There's now only 29 in the entire state of 169 towns and cities that have the 10% to have a relief from 830G. And of those, only 11 have 10% in that category 1. So you're expecting everybody else to come up with their 10% just on that one category. And the cost of development right now is very high, just as you're referring to the inflation and everything that's been happening. It's about $650,000 a unit to develop affordable, which is astronomical. So if you think about those numbers and then you realize that, if the state wants to help towns, that would be great. And towns like New Canaan have built 100% affordable. That's sort of every town has its own strategies. And I think that that's important to recognize as well, why one size policies to force this also don't work, because you have different economic factors that impact and the environment is different and natural resources are different. And you've got towns that are all reservoirs. So that's the challenge here is that so if you develop 100% affordable, it's not going to go away in 40 years. And it's not like 830G where you're building mostly market value. with 30% affordable. So that's why, that seems like a better idea. And if the governor wanted to partner with towns that are trying to build affordable so that they could maybe work toward their moratoriums, that's a true carrot, is help towns get to their moratoriums. And I think you'll start seeing those percentages of affordable kick up. And that actually creates a real affordable, which is the other problem with all these bills, is that there's very little affordable. There's like 10%, 20%. So it's not, we have to be honest about what these bills are and what they're not. And they're not about affordability.
And I would also add, with 830G, you can't grade a town by a percentage that they did or didn't make. Fairfield, for example, that's where I live, so I know the town very well. We have created a diversity of housing for many years now. A few years ago, we actually eased our regulations when it came to ADUs, accessory dwelling units. We've, added, a lot of apartment buildings in our Fairfield metro area. So we're very cognizant of creating diversity of housing stock. And I don't think you can just be graded on this arbitrary number from Hartford of this 10%. That's how I feel.
So I think the name CT 169 Strong is, again, along with the philosophy, right, Maria? You were telling me before we got started, kind of, the one size fits all model doesn't work. Like you said, Fairfield's a very different animal than Hartford or Waterbury or Bridgeport or New Haven, and should be treated as such. What do you think of the governor's plan, some $600 million to build 6,400 affordable housing units? I guess my first question would be where are those being built?
Well, it is
you need to know where you're going to build, but I mean, it's great to say I'm going to build all these houses. Whose town are you building them in, and on what land?
Well, there is a governor's bill that talks about the sort of the rules of engagement, and there are some items within that are concerning. Things like no off-street parking required, and that just doesn't work in some towns which have narrower roads. It's just the way the towns were developed, what they were prior to. They were farming towns. They weren't larger cities, or so each town is developed in its own way. And again, that's why some of these onerous parts of bills or ceding authority to a zoning board of appeals to make the decision on it, rather than planning and zoning, where it's they're the proper land use control and authorization, and they're the ones who are most experienced in doing it in the actual approval process of projects, not in the aftermath of appeal process. So again, that's where I feel that sometimes these ideas are well intended, and there are some good parts of them, and we wish that there was more collaboration with a lot of these zoning committees, local ones. And that's really the other part of being 169 Strong, is it's about the local voice and making sure that the local voice is represented, whether you're in Chatham, or you're in whatever towns you might be in, or in Killingly or Vernon, or whatever town it is. You've got to have different opportunities for people to say what works for them and what doesn't, and work on a collaborative basis, not on a top-down mandate basis.
Yeah, land is inherently local. And when we mute the voices of, town planning zoning commissions that I serve on, I mean, that is the most democratic process. For the past, year and a half, I've had the pleasure of going to of serving on this board. And every, twice a month, we hear from people, whether they like an application, they don't like an application. To me, that is, the beauty of our democratic process and, this American experiment. And unfortunately, the governor's bill, I think, gives they get rid of the zoning board essentially and give as of right to middle housing, and they give more power to the ZBA, which is a bit concerning, as does the desegregate Connecticut bill. So, I think if we want people to be engaged, we can't get rid of the avenues that they have that available to them.
I think I saw a quote from, and I think it was your group, but suggested that the desegregate Connecticut, that their ulterior motive was to pretty much tank the housing market in Connecticut, for the sake of equity and diversity. Is that am I attributing that incorrectly to you guys?
I'm not sure that that's necessarily what our concern is. Our concern is that there's really small affordability in any of the bills that they're doing. And again, when you're trying to, and they're saying, I guess it's more of a wolf in sheep's clothing, really, because what they're saying is, well, there's going to be a coordinator who's deciding how many units. Really, that's what it comes down to, how many units. And they went around and did a dog and pony show where they went to a number of different planning and zoning committees. And, it turned out, I guess, if you looked at Greenwich, there's 4 train stations, and they said that because of their population, it would be 30 units per acre. But then the question becomes, how many acres? And in the discussion in Greenwich, they said, well, they gave a range, 50 to 200, but a town that's bigger, or like a Greenwich, it would probably be more of the latter. So you're talking about 6,000 units. 6,000 units of development. And then, you realize then later, and that was before the bill ever came out. And the original bill said you can pick at least one station, but that language was removed from the bill. So then you're talking about 4 stations. So 6,000 times 4, 24,000 units of development in a town that only currently has a housing stock of 25,000 units. So you're asking them to double their entire housing stock in that bill. And those are the kind of things that, where you're not discussing about infrastructure and environmental impacts. And all of those train lines run near the shoreline. So you really have to be careful and thoughtful and diligent about this. And sometimes these bills, and especially like that one in Fair Share, they just don't seem like very serious bills, because they're leaving out, they say that they're collaborating, but there's no language about collaboration in the bill. It's literally the coordinator will tell you exactly how much and how and where. So I just find it hard to believe that a lot of towns will decide to step into it, because it's onerous. And part of me thinks that maybe the real strategy there was to take away the funding sources, because what it does is, if you don't opt in, it deprioritizes your towns from receiving funding. So it's scooping up all funding from all bunch of different, discretionary funding sources. And then it will now mandate who can get it, but based on whether they opt into these onerous, units of density development.
Yeah, and TOD is a great thing, and Desegregate is proposing a so-called TOD bill, but it misses some really, essential components to TOD, such as retail, commercial. A vibrant TOD community has those things plus the residential, and this is just residential. So where are they going to shop? Where are they going to eat? So that's certainly, a concern of ours as well. And as Maria said, it also punishes towns if they don't opt into this program. They will be denied, brownfield remediation, for example, funding for essential infrastructure remediation. So, the devil's always in the details, and I don't think people are really looking under the hood that closely.
It's interesting too. There was the bill that they brought up some weeks ago, and it didn't go anywhere. And I asked about it, and they told me it wasn't meant to. That sometimes they just debate, but they talked about whether illegal immigrants in Connecticut should be able to vote. And a lot of conservative groups in Connecticut were, that was like the talk radio thing of the day, that the Democrats brought that up. And again, and asking, Ritter and Rojas and company, like, if you guys, is that like a serious thing? And they were like, no, we're just trying to debate things. And so I think it interesting that there's certain things that they're okay debating. There's other things where it's like, again, they're being dismissive, where it's, oh, they're just looking for something to complain about. I think these are all, legit complaints. One of the other things, Alexis, the first thing you sent me connected to 169 Strong, CT Strong rather, was links to the bills. And I mean, you guys don't just like, I hate this bill, don't vote for it. You guys break down not only the problems as you guys see fit, but also you'll point out the things in the bills that you do like. And I think, again, these ladies don't seem to be stirring trouble. They seem like they're offering helpful suggestions. Why do you think it's being perceived differently?
I have I have reasons. I think to some extent, and I hate to get political because land use should never ever be political. But the reality is, the makeup of our General Assembly is one party rule, and I think there's an arrogance of power, and we know what is best. You elected us. That's kind of what I've gathered after 3 years of doing this with Maria. I mean, there are some nights, and Maria more so, she's up till 3 o'clock, 4 a.m. dissecting bills, typing them up to get them out to the masses. We're not just doing this to stir up trouble. To your, as you said, this matters to us. We live here. This is our home, and we want to chart a better path for Connecticut as well. But we need to be included in these conversations. Everybody has to be involved.
And especially, I mean, again, I'm not a planning and zoning person. I came to this as an area that I began to study more so because of my background in real estate. But it's important to me. I think it's important to anybody who, when you consider your home as your largest asset for most people, and whatever that is, and that's the American dream, is to have home ownership. So you want to make sure that you are protecting that asset for everybody and for the future. And that's what zoning was really. We're vilifying zoning for market conditions when truly there are 2 towns in Connecticut that have no zoning whatsoever. And there's no run on development there because economics still plays a factor in where you build, and that's something that we have to remember and pay attention to, and make sure that we're not creating a bigger problem by pushing communities to do certain development that is not going to really help us. One of the things you said before was about what are they really aiming at? And one thing I go back to, and everybody often says, no, that's not it. But I've now heard Pete Harrison of 169, I'm sorry, of CT, of Desegregate Connecticut say it. And I've also heard Sarah Bronin say it, was that if you build more housing, even if it's just high density market value apartments, you're bringing in more state income tax revenue. And so if you build that income tax revenue, that's a free option for the state, right? Because what do they have to, they don't really give those towns, especially if we look at, again, Fairfield County, because it seems like a lot of times the bullseye is a lot on right down in Fairfield County. And so you're building then their state income tax revenues, but at the same time, it's the municipalities that are faced with, if what about Greenwich, and if you're doubling housing stock, what does that do to your sewer system infrastructure? What does that do to your wells? What like all of the water system and all of that, and the environment, and all of those factors are then the infrastructure issues are recognized as, again, I'm a board of finance member for my town. Those hit your local property income taxes. That's where your budget for your towns hits. So you're just going to saddle towns with these costs when the state's going to get their state income tax revenue. So that's the other concern here, is you want to have smart growth. You want to have transit oriented development is great if as Alexis mentioned, if it's with development with commercial, with residential, with office space, with retail, that's all great. But you have to be thoughtful about it, and you have to do what works for each community and the size and what the capacity is of what they can handle.
Yeah.
How much of the push for the affordable housing is just sort of, like fundamentally liberal Democrats, like that's just kind of what they do, right? Diversify communities, more affordable housing. Again, Marie, I thought you made some great points there. Again, towns only have so many resources before they could be overwhelmed. So for the state to just think that they could decide what a town's house, I mean, it definitely, you're asking the wrong people. So this seems like the idea, again, we all understand we need more housing in Connecticut, but you think it makes more sense, and I can't help but agree that doing it locally is the way to go. And again, I know we want to get to 10%. What wasn't that what now? Was that supposed to be like last July or the July before, when everybody was supposed to get to the 10%?
No, the 10% is kind of a rolling target. There's no like hard and fast rule that you by 2050 you have to get by 10%.
Okay.
You're just subject to 830G as long as you don't have that 10%.
Okay.
So it's just a threshold. It's not a goal.
Yeah,
but it's
Fairfield has. I'm sorry. Fairfield has like 2.8% right now of affordable housing, and then hopefully we will get to a moratorium. I think at 4%. So that's when the 830G kind of eases for a few years. It's again all very arbitrary. And some towns like Easton has 70% of reservoir water. They give water to the entire Greater Bridgeport area. How could they ever build, a massive amount of apartment buildings without disrupting any of that? They don't have the sewer capacity. Some towns simply can't do it.
Yeah, they have 70% watershed and 96% they supply 96% of the water supply to Bridgeport area.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's my point. I talked to earlier today, I did an interview with a former prisoner who testified in front of the judiciary, and the head of the judiciary committee didn't know some basic things about the judicial system. And obviously we talked about that at great length. This seems to be sort of the way with politicians where, again, like in theory, an idea makes sense. But again, if you're leaving the zoning and planning out, you're doing everybody a disservice, which is sometimes how government works.
Right. And as we always say, land is the most finite of resources. I know people are probably getting tired of us saying that, but it truly is. You can't make more land. You can't move land. What we have here, we have to be good stewards of it. And to throw it away to a coordinator or to a bureaucrat in Hartford is to me bad policy, bad government. I don't think we would ever want to do that. And I think we all think affordable housing is a good thing. We all want everyone to be able to live where they want to live. But, I think one thing that we always talk about in our group is these are rental units. They're not helping people buy. And as we know, the key to a generational wealth and to empowering people is through, home ownership, not through rentals. But again, that may not be everybody's American dream either. Some people don't buy a home for a reason and vice versa. So I think that's also something we need to think about. Does everybody want to live in a suburb like Darien or Fairfield? Maybe not. Maybe they're happy where they are. So I think there's a lot of assumptions going on.
And the other thing is that I'll go back to that 830G with the different columns again. So that column 1, where we talked about how that's building your own government subsidized affordable housing units. There's money given every year from the state's coffers to build housing, affordable housing. And as you can imagine, the lion's share of that goes to the largest cities, over 50% of it. So I pulled up a report from 2021 where 50 million, 29 of it went to Hartford, New Haven, and then another little sliver to Waterbury out of 25 million of that. So how much of, if you're only giving it to certain places and you want to see it elsewhere, my one of the things I've said is help those towns that are trying to do it. One of the things my town, New Canaan, is doing is building 100% affordable, which helps us get to a moratorium, but it also makes sure that that property stays forever as affordable. It's not going to just go off the rolls in 40 years or whatever when a developer is done with their project and then automatically go right back to being market value. So those are sound, and it helps when a town does it because they can make sure they site it well, that it's closer to transportation, closer to what's needed. So those are the kind of things that I think if again, there's partnership, if we're really talking about building affordable, then collaboration with towns, with the local leaders makes a lot more sense. Now, Greenwich is talking about looking at different programs where if a builder's come in with a project and they want to see more affordable, wouldn't it be great if the government chipped in a little bit more so that maybe 50% of the project was affordable and the other 50% was market value? So those are the kind of things that innovative, creative solutions that are being thought of in towns like New Canaan and in Greenwich and in Westport, where we recognize that land cost is high. It is hard to find affordable in our communities. So if there's ways that we can work with the state and be an ally instead of setting up this pitting towns against cities and adversarial, that would be a much better climate and you would find much more effective solutions.
Yeah, and I'm also piggybacking on that. Senator Tony Wang during last week's P&D hearing, there was a public hearing with the desegregate bill, and Pete Harrison was one of the speakers from Desegregate Connecticut. And Tony had an interesting exchange about this trust issue, how desegregate is going from town to town, telling towns we know better than you do. And that has not sit well in many of the communities that Desegregate Connecticut has visited. They've gone to Easton, Stamford, a number of other towns. An outside group telling us that they know better, and it's just astounding. And again, there's just it's just this us against them mentality, and it's very, very unhealthy, I think, for a good government policy.
Do you think housing activists maybe have a little too much pull with the party in power?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. And it's interesting because we found the Melville Trust is an interesting funding source for Partnership for Strong Communities, Sean Geo. And so when you look at some of these other things that you're seeing, these nonprofit groups that seem to spawn one off the other, and you look at articles that are coming out from, CT Mirror receives $50,000 from Melville Trust. So, NPR receives money. So does Connecticut Public Television. So they're literally giving funds to push out to create a narrative. I don't want to say narrative, but I guess it is. It's a narrative, and just only have that one voice heard. So it's amplified over and over, reinforced from all of these different groups. During the testimony, we also even found out that the students who were testifying on behalf of Desegregate Connecticut received grants to work, to volunteer, paid grants, paid volunteer grants. I don't even know how that works exactly, but they received grants from Wesleyan was one of them, and so they're receiving grants to testify on bills related to zoning, which is interesting, to say the least. And that's what they've decided to create their activism around. And this is, we're volunteers. We don't get paid a penny. we are homeowners, or we live in our communities. We're part of the fabric of our towns. And that's why we're engaged. We care about our communities. And I just it concerns me when there's so much money being tossed around to push out a certain narrative.
Yeah. And it's been hard. It's a David and Goliath situation for us, because we're often cast as, anti-affordable housing, people, and we're simply not. We're your neighbors. We serve on your local boards. And it's been a tough road, because a lot of people don't want to be, maybe on the wrong side of history, if you will. I don't know. So it's been challenging, but I think we've made a lot of headwinds. A lot of people are beginning to see, yeah, you guys raised some really good points. Let's slow down this process.
Yeah, like I said, I feel like you guys and the work that you've done so far and the stuff that I've seen, it's the way, even on the Facebook page is very cool. The website, by the way, ct169strong.org. You guys are a .org, and people should definitely check this out. But again, you kind of break things down and just explain what's going on. And it seems like the Democrats are they really want everybody involved under penalty of death or something like that. And so people, not that you have to vote but you should be following along, because this really is important. And again, we're homeowners, and these are the communities that we live. I live in Wethersfield. Believe me,
great town.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I love it. And our neighbor to the north is always looking for money. It's one of those. And I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. And again, Maria, and Alexis, I know you're very busy people. And so again, to be putting the work in for this, as you're doing, I definitely don't get the sense that this is just a complaint group. Again, like I said, and I invite people to go look at this. It's so thoughtful and well done, where again, these things are broken down. Here's what we like about the bill. Here's where it goes wrong. Here's where we would fix it. I think other than being on the other side of the activists, I think that's what you're doing wrong here. It would appear to me that because you are um, on the other side of the activists, it makes you the enemy in some way. And therefore, your opinion is not one that they want to hear. Am I hitting the nail on the head?
I think you nailed it perfectly. Absolutely.
I think so as well. And, especially when you have a presser or you have, points that you've made and you've stated what are the wrong things in the bills, you've reached out to reporters and legacy media to tell them about it. And they're just not talking about it. It's the easiest thing for them to do is just ignore it, because then you keep people unaware. And an informed electorate is the most important thing we can do for people to understand, because these bills, they get passed. Let's talk about for a minute about the bill that got passed 2 years ago. That was the bill that allowed ADUs as of right, but you could opt out of it. And it allowed parking as of right. Parking was limited. So you could only have one spot if you have a studio or one bedroom off street, and 2 spots if you had 2 bedroom or more. So that was it. And it limited parking just to that. And you could opt out of that as well. So when you look at Westcog, which is the Fairfield County communities, all of Westcog, but for, I believe, one town, which just set its own rule, opted out of the ADUs because they didn't want ADUs everywhere. They want to be very specific in what makes sense for their communities. But it was all the cities, all the state, all the rural areas, and all of the suburbs. So you recognize that one size policy, again, does not fit all. And the same thing with parking. All but 2 opted out of the parking because, again, one size policy does not fit all. So you would have thought that after that happened, that they adopted 2 years ago, that this year maybe they would let up on parking, but they haven't. And so it's this lack of understanding and really collaboration. And again, it doesn't matter whether you were a city or a suburb. They both felt the same way about it, that they're best to decide that on a local basis, not from a top-down mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if we get a little political for a minute?
Sure.
Good. I've been calling on Ben Proto to step down since November 9th. I mean, to see Republicans lose election after election, to see the state get bluer with some of the worst economic conditions of all time, I think to myself, is there ever going to be a period where Republicans can bounce back in this state? And to me, it just seems like a good start would be maybe with new leadership, because I think being a Republican in this state, it's like taxation without representation. And I think the Republican voice in this state is getting silenced. And because there are people like Dominic Rapini who live in this state, I think some of that extremist wacko nonsense gets lumped onto the whole group. And I think it makes everybody look bad. And I don't know about you two, but I'm like the cycle of how these elections go, where Republicans, I was joking with somebody, you'll recall the Jahana Hayes, George Logan race was close. And Republicans were like, wow, we got within like 2,500. And I thought, you sound like the Democrats in Texas. You're delusional. You don't have enough people there. You don't have enough votes there. You're going to keep on losing. And it seems to me that a group like yours, again, just gets painted as like the bad guys because you have a different solution for a problem everybody agrees exists.
I would agree with that. I think there's 2 things that hurt Republicans. The first one being, again, the media. They don't put out any information related to, they're pushing a certain viewpoint, and that they stick with. And so if you look at certain candidates, they got very little coverage, unless they showed up somewhere and you told them to give equal time. There was no equal time. There was no equal time. So if you think that there's the opportunity to do that, there really isn't. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, I think you also had so much turnover in the last, since COVID. There were so many people who moved into our state. Very, very much so, even in, the turnover, especially down in Fairfield County for sure. But I would imagine, everywhere there was a lot of movement in out of the larger metropolitan areas looking for a little bit more space. And I think that, that also brings a lot of people who have different thoughts and different, viewpoints. And I think that that's also changed a lot of the makeup of a lot of towns. And I think that's probably a better reflection of why a number of people who lost in the Fairfield County area is because of that change in the makeup of the voter base.
Yeah. And I would also say, some, more radical extreme Republicans have the megaphone, and to many, either independents or perhaps moderate Democrats, that's the Republican vision. If someone says it loud enough, then that must be what every Republican thinks. And I'm certainly not like that. I'm kind of an outlier because I have viewpoints that are probably more liberal than in some cases, sometimes more conservative. But that's also being like a Connecticut Republican. I think we're a different breed than others around the country. I think we have to evaluate things. I agree. After an election like we had in November, I think we have to evaluate, what is our vision? What do we stand for as Republicans in Connecticut? Who are we? And that's a discussion that we need to have. I don't know if people can be that actualized and really look hard and fast, or they just want to keep, reelecting their friends to positions.
Alexis, one of the things I heard from people over and over again was that, look, the Democrats didn't do a great job, but the Republicans didn't really seem to offer up ideas or solutions. It was more like, well, these guys suck, huh? And that seemed to sort of be the prevailing thought. Even, I thought about 3/4 of Bob Stefanowski's campaign, you didn't really get a whole lot of like, what are you going to do? And I got a chance to spend quite a bit of time with Bob. And right towards the end, I felt like he was hitting on all cylinders with me with all the things he was talking about. And I thought, you should have been saying this like 4 months ago, dude.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, agree. Bob is a great guy. I think he offered a lot for the state. I can't comment much more beyond that. I don't know. I think I saw a lot of, House Republicans talking about zoning, talking about a lot of issues that are central to most people. And I don't know if those were actually picked up by the media. I think there is issues with the media. And I love the media. My first job was a journalist. I was a print reporter. I worked in TV news for a long time. I have high regard for the media.
Alexis, I can attest to your love of media.
Yes. Big WICC thing. I'm probably, yeah. So I do love media, and I respect it, but I just think there's been a disconnect with the media getting out a message and them just articulating one viewpoint about Republicans. Bob Stefanowski, for example, a super wealthy, successful guy. So is Ned Lamont. In every article, they talked about how Bob Stefanowski is a multimillionaire. So is Governor Lamont.
You almost wouldn't think the other guy made $66 million.
Right. And look, I think it's great if they're both successful, businessmen, more power to them. But there's even just like that simple fact, exactly to your point. I don't know.
Another person who I spent some time with was Leora Levy. And I'll tell you, I liked her a lot. What a wonderful woman, great values, great morals. My first question to her was, do you think being pro-life in Connecticut that you have any kind of a chance? And she said the most interesting thing to me, and I thought, sounds a little delusional in Connecticut. She said, I think people will come around on that. And I thought, no, they won't. Like, that's, to me, losing on an issue like that in a state like Connecticut, it just doesn't make sense. And so, again, my thought is, as someone who's kind of like you, Alexis, socially liberal, I'm fiscally conservative. I just feel like if we focus more on issues like housing, things that are important to everyday voters, I think you can slowly win back that monstrous 41% of independents who overwhelmingly go to that side, even though they would rather not. So I think what you guys are doing, in fact, is a step in the right direction of like, let's focus on issues. We're going to win with issues, not picking on transgender kids, not making, being wishy-washy on women's rights or whatever. Like, just let's talk about issues. I think that's where Republicans tend to stand out, especially where, again, you're looking at already a big housing crisis in this state, massive inflation. I think now's the time for Republicans to focus on issues and win people that way.
I agree. People care about, inflation when they're going to the grocery store and paying $9 for, a dozen eggs. They're worried about their electric bills, and they're also worried about zoning and the direction of their town. And if a big building is going to be next to their little modest home that they scrimped and saved for. These are, those are the bread and butter issues that we have to go after. I don't think you should ever hang a campaign on abortion. I'm probably more liberal in that area than some other Republicans, but that's okay. I agree with you. And I think we do have to have a reckoning, and we have to have an honest discussion on all these things. And we're just not.
You're right.
Do we agree on Ben Proto?
Sorry, repeat that. I'm sorry.
I said, do we agree on Ben Proto?
Look, I know Ben Proto. I don't know him well. I think he's doing probably the best he can. I don't know the mechanics of State Central. I'm not trying to avoid your question, but I think
it's a terribly unfair question, Alexis.
What's that?
It's a terribly unfair question.
Yeah,
I think
it's a very tough job. I think it's a very challenging job. I don't know if any other person would do it better. I don't know, but I agree. I think we should look at that role.
I think I've seen him on a bunch of interviews, including on this network, and unfortunately not by me, but I heard him saying things like, there's such diversity of thought in the Republican Party, and the liberals just have one mindset, and that's why they won. And I thought, are you serious, dude? Like, you really think that? I don't think that's true at all. And I think if that's what he thinks, that I think he's completely missing the mark. Again, I'm not trying to get anyone to say or agree with me, but I think focusing on issues, to me, that's what I heard from the WICC audience as we tried to make head of what happened here. How come there was no red wave? How did this place get even bluer? And time again from people, I just heard the Republicans didn't really offer up ideas as much as they were like, these guys are terrible. Mm-hmm. Well, they are, but what's the alternative?
No, I think that's a fair point, and I think that's a fair criticism. I've heard that from people, in local campaigns here. Well, I only heard the guy say something negative about his opponent. What's his idea? What's his platform? Because he can't go up to Hartford and just say, no. You have to offer a vision and an idea. And we need more of that. And I think that's why CT 169 Strong has not just said no, we said no, but we look at it this way, or we need to do this. Because we are trying to be problem solvers because we love our state, and just saying no isn't a solution.
For people who are watching and are like, oh, Maria and Alexis, yes. How can people get involved with you? What do you need from people? What would be useful for people who see this as a major issue?
To be honest, I'll answer your first question. Go to ct169strong.org. That's the wonderful website that you've mentioned. And we have a breakdown of all the bills, ways to actually connect with your lawmakers. If you don't have time to write your own testimony, we've kind of have a summary of suggested testimony, and you can easily click on that. And we also need money. The reality is we did hire a lobbyist this year to help us through the process of working with the legislator on perhaps killing some of these bills or modifying them. It became such an onerous process for us. We both work full time. We're volunteers, and it became so much that we decided to hire someone to help us. We're still doing most of the work, but we do rely on her to work with the legislators because we're not lobbyists. We don't know how to do that. So we are paying her, and people are also welcome to donate to us as well. And the donate button is on our website as well.
Great website, by the way. I really like the way, again, where if people want to get involved, it does seem like all the resources are just a quick click away. This is a hot button issue. Every state rep I speak to, this is generally the first issue we talk about. It's good to get a different perspective because it's one that really none of them has addressed at all. And I think there's some 12 different proposals out there. So a lot of bills, a lot of ideas. Alexis Harrison and Maria Weingarten, I appreciate you coming here and explaining your group and talking about how important this stuff is to people's everyday life and how important and taxing could be on their towns.
Great. Pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
And thank you so much for doing this, because as we said, it's so important for the media to spread the word, because it's harder for us to, that's why we need the money. We need the money to get the word out, to really, have more advertising, to get some information out to all corners of our state.
Yeah, we're going up against groups that are largely funded by RPA. They have millions and millions of dollars. We have a very small budget and volunteers. So we're doing the best we can.
Grassroots.
But we're scrappy and mighty, and you can never dismiss scrappy and mighty.
Alexis, I'll tell you, if you're involved, something tells me it's going to be very successful. Maria, we just met today. I get that impression of you as well. Big time realtor that you are. I appreciate the time from both of you.
Thank you so much.
I will definitely, as we move through the legislative session, get a little bit closer to some of these things becoming reality. We'll have you back here, talk more about it. And again, CT169strong.org is the website, and you can also check them out on Facebook. Big thank you to Alexis Harrison and Maria Weingarten. Ladies, have a great one.
You too. We'll talk soon.
You too.
Thank you. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Connecticut Politics TV. Make sure you check us out on social media at CT Politics TV Live. You can also visit the website at ctpolitics.tv. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night, 5 o'clock, for another episode of Connecticut Politics TV. Good night.